You all are a seemingly endless source of inspiration to me. And so it was that the other day, someone from church was in my office, we were talking, and they told me about a passage from Charles Dickens' The Christmas Story, A Christmas Story, that either I didn't remember or I didn't know about, and I was really surprised. So surprised that I went back and I looked it up in the book and read the passage. Now the movies, and there are so many, you could have a marathon this week, you know. The movies all show the ghost, Jacob Marley. Yeah, you do know that. You know this one. Yes, the ghost, Jacob Marley, comes to warn his former partner in life, in business while he was alive. He warns his miserly partner, Ebenezer Scrooge, that 3 ghosts will visit him that night. 3 ghosts will visit you. The ghosts, of course, of Christmas, past, present, and future. Yes. And each of those ghosts are going to show him a vision, a ghostly and terrifying vision. But what I didn't realize was that before he leaves, Jacob Marley also shows Scrooge a vision. Either I missed this or I didn't remember. So Marley explains that every human on earth is required to care about other humans while they're still alive. He says, quote, "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men," you know, the dated terminology for people, "and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life," in other words, if you don't go out among your fellow people to ask them how they're doing, to see how everything is, that spirit, he says, is condemned to do so after death. Amen. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness. So does this mean that the spirit is condemned to wander the earth looking at what they can't share in? No. What they can no longer share with other people to help them. And then he shows Scrooge this vision. It's of the spirits of the dead, some of whom Scrooge recognizes as his former pals. Perhaps you have some people in mind that you knew from earlier in your life. And these spirits are not being personally punished, not personally, for having been selfish and self-absorbed in life. No. The spirits of the selfish dead spend all their time in the afterlife, hovering around living people who are suffering. They haunt the streets, finding people who are unhoused, sick, cold, and hungry, and they follow them, trying to help them. The air, Dickens writes, was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. Yes, none were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle. And so these are the chains forged of the ill deeds they did in their lives. He cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant, whom it sat below upon a doorstep. How many of you have seen people sleeping on doorsteps in the cold, waiting to be put out at first light? The misery with them all was clearly, with the ghosts, was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. It's a powerful image. And Marley's ghost goes on to say, "I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, he says. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole. Now weary journeys lie before me. Now, I'm not saying that this is a theology you should adopt. You are on your own recognizance when it comes to your theology. But the metaphor, I think, has a very important lesson in it. And the lesson is not that every living human should toil restlessly forever until there's no suffering anywhere, as if that were possible. Sometimes we suffer ourselves. Sometimes we have little left to give. In fact, Marley says it's not possible for humans to fix everything. He says, quote, "This earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it's susceptible will all be developed." He says that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. None of us do everything that we possibly could. Sometimes we're tired. But even when we try as hard as we can, each of us alone is limited. There's always more to do than can be done by any individual. But Marley laments that few people realize, he says, quote, "No space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunity misused." And it's true. So Scrooge, at this point, Dickens writes, was beginning to apply all of this to himself. And he says, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." And this is when Jacob Marley lays out the most epic smackdown of 1843. "You were always a good man of business." "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business." Ooh. "The dealings of my trade," he says, "my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." Dickens was a Unitarian. It's true. And in many ways, he was the social conscience of his time. How can we be the social consciences of ours? What is our business? Every K-Val article about unhoused people in Eugene refers to, quote, "the homeless crisis," as if homeless people themselves are a crisis. Like the crisis is that all these homeless people are here for some reason. How would you solve, hypothetically, a homeless crisis, except by disposing of the homeless who are the problem? And I know it can be tough when people without houses are leaving needles and human waste in the church garden, or yelling outside your warm home at 3 o'clock in the morning. It can be tough to have compassion. But Dickens understood keenly that the problem is not that the poor and the mentally ill and the suffering exist. When Scrooge asks, "Are there no workhouses?" he's asking how we can dispose of the homeless problem. I would say that's not a real problem. We have a homelessness problem. We have a society that has driven up the cost of housing so high that people can no longer afford to purchase time indoors. We live in a society where there are far more empty housing units than unhoused people, where a recent study found that older people tend to be more conservative because the poor die young. We live in a society now that holds that unless a person's fit to work, they don't deserve to stay alive. that your right to live, merely live, is tied to your ability to generate more mansions for the wealthy to sit empty, and that when you are of no use to them, to the Ebenezer Scrooges of this world, you can die. Now, I refuse to believe that there isn't enough money floating around Eugene, Oregon to put in another 2,000 Conestoga huts and end the homelessness problem. I refuse to believe that universal health care and comprehensive mental health coverage is somehow unfeasible for our country, but not others. The problem is not the homeless. The problem is a society that has refused to provide for everyone. Jacob Marley said, "At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raised them to that blessed star, which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light could have conducted me?" I think yes. Now, I've mentioned to you before that I don't believe in random acts of kindness so much as I believe in systemic acts of legislation. But I also believe that we can be the social consciences of our time by affirming that every unhoused person is worthy of dignity, some little dignity to what small amounts we are able to provide. Warm socks, lotion, a bar of chocolate, a stick of deodorant. When I worked at the Eugene Mission in the Women's and Children's Center, there were 80 women sharing one bar of deodorant. And they would distribute it with tissue paper, wiping it across the top of the stick and handing it out to each woman. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And this church has worked every year to restore some small measure of that dignity. Beside me here are things we're not going to be putting in our care packages. They'll be distributed as needed. We have something like 1,500 feminine care products here. You all sent in so many pads and tampons and clean pairs of underwear. It goes so far for people who have made so little work for so long. Yes, it's a radical act to set aside one Sunday a year at this time of year when Jacob Marley said his ghost suffered so much. It's a radical act now to simply love one another in a society that operates as if love were a limited commodity. Let us now act in love. We have supplies enough now to make, between 60 and 90 bags. Now, there's more people than supplies. So, I invite you to team up, perhaps with someone you don't know very well, and either work in pairs, or some of you can remain at your tables with art supplies. There's extra supplies at the table in the back. You can go on back there. And a good number of you should be making encouraging letters. You can go to that back table, or if you have supplies at your table, write a note of love and encouragement, or several, to be included in our care packages. And when people who have made the packages come back to the table, you put those notes in them, okay? And when we're all done putting this stuff together, we're going to join hands and bless the bags. And at the end of the service, you'll drop off your care packages in the box at the back. Now, the choir can participate in this too, but you need to come back for your last song. I trust you. There are 2 tables here, which means you can make 4 rows. And remember, you might be working with a friend, someone you don't know well. And those of you who remain behind at your tables, a question that you might ask of each other during this 10 or 15 minutes together might be, what was a time when you were shown unexpected love? What was a time someone graced you at this time of year? What was a time someone showed you care and dignity when you weren't expecting it? I invite you all now, as you're willing and able, to either go make some kind notes or come forward in rows. Start at the end, there's bags there, pick up a bag. Follow the signs telling you how much stuff to put in. You may now come forward. let's take another 5 minutes to write our encouraging notes and talk with our friends.